That was very kind, very generous. Thank you for those remarks, Paul. So Paul did set me up nicely, I think, in some of his remarks earlier today after Dr. Goodnight spoke. I'm going to talk today about architects as business leaders, which is where I think we need to be. And I think we need to be there for a number of reasons, but not the least of which is the contextual awareness that we have, the understanding of impact, the ability for deep and critical thought. I mean, all that's good, right? So the intent of this little speech is going to be to, first of all, help you understand what the opportunity is. Many of you have already recognized it. Give you some tips. If you can walk away for things you can do to sort of get in that driver's seat, I'd be very happy with that. So let's hope, fingers crossed, that that's where we get. So today I'm going to talk about four main points. I'm going to start with incentives, because I think it's really interesting what drives people and what sorts of activities and actions we engage in and that we take as a result of how we're incented. So I'm going to talk about that. The second thing I'm going to talk about is what I would call the architect's dilemma. Not really a dilemma, it's sort of the architect's lot in life. You know, where we are today, sort of how are we, and I'm lumping myself in as one of you because, by the way, most of the things that I do are things that I have learned and developed over my many years as architects in very, very large, complex environments. And so the architect's plight is the second bullet. The third thing I'm going to talk about is what's interesting about today. So there's an opportunity, call it, I don't know, the digital opportunity. We're going to talk a little bit about the nature of that opportunity and why right now, I think, is our time. It's the architect's time. And understanding that opportunity will lead us to the last point, which is the actions. So what can we go home today? This is Friday though, right? So this afternoon, tomorrow, Monday, whenever you go back to work, what are the things you can immediately start doing that I think will cause you to see a change in how the business community as a whole engages you all the way up through the board level. So that's the hope. That's where I think we're going to get. So start with incentives. I'll just leap right in there and I'll talk about my own comp structure. How's that? So let's talk about executive level compensation. Because ultimately, many of us are intrinsically motivated, right? A lot of architects are intrinsically motivated. We care about making a difference. We care about doing interesting work. We want to be engaged with other smart people. These are things that are internal motivators, right? It doesn't have anything to do with how we're compensated. But at the end of the day, we also care about getting compensated, right? And so do all members of your business community. And your boss, the CIO, as well as your boss's peers, CFO, CMO, et cetera, are all compensated slightly differently than senior managers are. Specifically, senior executive compensation is a small portion of the compensation is a base salary, right? The salary that you get on a monthly basis or whatever the period is. And that's just for showing up at work, and doing the bare minimum, right? You get your base salary. Now, most of you in this room probably also have a bonus. But the bonus really is that, right? It's a cash bonus. It's a bonus for, meeting objectives that are set with you and your manager. The cash bonus for a senior executive is based on how well the company does. And there may be a stock-based component to that bonus as well. But in senior executive compensation, keep in mind, these are the people who are making major decisions that impact your lives and that drive a lot of the activity, the prioritization work that you do, right? So these guys are incented primarily based on how well the company does. So, base salary, small, relatively small. Bonus, relatively large part of the overall compensation. And as Paul mentioned so brilliantly earlier when he was speaking after Dr. Goodnight, that bonus is not paid out based on how many projects we deliver, right? That bonus is paid out based on how well the company does. And so, when you have senior executives making decisions and listening to pitches from other parts of the organization, including IT, including architects within IT, that senior executive is thinking about the end game, the business outcome. And they're not necessarily doing it because of for altruistic reasons, although one hopes that they do genuinely care and have a great deal of loyalty to their shareholders and their customers and so on. But they're doing it because they need to figure out if they're going to be able to pay for their kids' college, right? I mean, they are being considered very personally based on how well those business outcomes are achieved and the company, how well the company does. So I think that's the first thing for you to keep in mind as you engage with the senior-most executives at your company. And it should also be top of mind when you think about the sort of priority that you set and recommend within the IT division or within business divisions with whom you engage as an advisor. So that's sort of the first thing I wanted to point out. Now I'd like you to imagine something. Imagine a world in which your compensation is largely, let's call it, for lack of a better word, commission. How many of you don't have to answer, but how many of you would be willing to take a commission-based architecture job? In other words, the decisions that you make, and the recommendations that you make, and the state that you build, and the processes that you define, and the capabilities that you insist must be in place for the company, and the direct correlation to the company's, one hopes, positive results. You get paid as a percentage of those positive results. Some of you are right now thinking, oh yeah, that's fabulous, because you're thinking about all those things that you did and those decisions that you made that made the company a ton of money. You're like, I would not be at this conference, I would be on my yacht right now, if that were the case, right? I mean, so many of you are thinking, yeah. And then others of you are thinking, there is no way. And it's not because you're a bad architect, it's not because you haven't made good decisions, it's because you're thinking that in your organization, you've worked really hard, you've made decisions that have made the company a lot of money, and no one has recognized it. And so you're thinking to yourself, how can I even connect those dots? How can I get compensated for that? Because, right now, I'm sort of the behind-the-scenes advisor, and I seem to be holding everything together, but, how could that even work? Your senior-most executives are paid exactly like that. So your senior-most executives are only paid if the company does well. So those people, those C-level execs that you engage with, they care very deeply about the business outcomes that you can deliver. I personally, having come from the architecture community, I personally put a lot of faith in architects. I've been successful largely not only because of my architecture background and all the reasons that I mentioned earlier, understanding of context and so on, that we have just as part of our core competency, but also because when I moved out of an architecture role, I surrounded myself with people who have great architecture chops. So anyway, I think that part of our challenge here today, and part of what I want you to walk away with as we talk a little bit more, is how can we get that recognition and that sort of high impact engagement for architects in all the organizations that are represented here today. So let's talk about the current state of affairs, the architect's plight. Good friend of mine, many friends with actually several of you here in the room, a guy named Lewis Curtis, one of the greatest infrastructure architects I've ever met. Works for Microsoft, actually has a great deal of influence there now. At the time, when he said this for the first time, he didn't have quite as much influence, and he referred to himself as a brain on a stick. He said, I'm a brain on a stick. They go, they keep me in the closet, they come up, they open the closet, they take the brain on the stick out, set me down, ask me some tough questions, I answer the questions, they say thank you very much, they take me and put me back in the closet. And then, the adults go on and make decisions based on what they learned from me. And his comment was just, on one hand it's sort of gratifying because, I get called in for the really, really tough questions and I think that's kind of cool. But on the other hand, I could have contributed so much more, and certainly subsequently he has. But that sense of frustration is something that I think a lot of architects feel on a daily basis, because we are consulted, architects are consulted for the really hairy problems, but may not be brought into the senior executive team meeting. How many times have you sat down and brainstormed with the CEO and the rest of the C-suite about a problem? Even if it's a tactical meeting, not even a strategic meeting. How many times you've been brought in? Maybe some, depending upon the size of your company, maybe you're brought in all the time. But for a very, very, very large company, it's very unusual to have an architect sitting in that room. When, I would posit that someone with that level of capability should probably always be in the room, when you're solving a complex problem. Because certainly business isn't getting any less complex, is it? So why do we have this plight? First, institutional memory and bias. This is the phenomenon, your current, it's the phenomenon where current perception or past perception is very naturally carried forward into the future. This is the thing that you see when you go home for Thanksgiving and your family's there and all your aunts and uncles are there and all your cousins are there and all of a sudden you're 12, right? This is the same phenomenon where all of a sudden everything that you ever did as a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old are trotted out and everyone has a good life. This is what happens and you suddenly find yourself acting 12. This is all hypothetical, I have no personal knowledge of this. But this is sort of the same problem. You come in as a relatively junior position, you join a company, maybe you start as a senior developer, maybe you start as an entry-level architect, but that's all you ever are for a period of time. And it takes a lot of overt action to break the bias or the understanding of what you were once as being the current state. So that's number one. And that's just human nature. That's not anything against any one of us, right? That's just human nature. We classify somebody as being a certain level and a certain type of value add, and it's hard to break one's own mindset about what somebody can bring to bear. The other thing is, Michael Porter's value chain model. This is management canon, by the way, right? This is the one that says IT is a supporting function. It's correct that it does span all lines of business and functional areas. Yes, that is true. But that is something that every single person with an MBA, any single person that's been in a significant management position in any company, has just accepted as truth. IT is a supporting function, and decisions are made somewhere else. Well, you, my friends, as architects, are supporting functions of that supporting function. And that is an extraordinarily difficult place to break out of. So there's a little bit of just situational constraint that we need to break through. And that's no fault of ours, right? That's no fault of the architects. Now there are some self-inflicted wounds that we as an architecture community as a whole have, indulged in. Sometimes we're called arrogant, right? Who wants to work with someone who's arrogant? Nobody. Nobody wants to work with someone who's arrogant. Sometimes this arrogance is born of just, we happen to have all the answers. It's not our fault that we are always right. Maybe you deserve to be arrogant because you're fabulous, but you can't show it, right? It's okay to be arrogant, just don't act arrogant. You can't show it. And I think that situational awareness as it relates to interpersonal communication, the human dynamics that was part of the stack that ISA has developed for how you can be a successful architect, that piece is something that a lot of architects have ignored over the years. I'll tell you a story about myself. I credit a woman who's a good friend of mine. I worked with her at a very, very large Fortune 50 company. At this company, and I've worked for several, so if you go look up, you won't know which one it is, because I've worked for many. This particular company, I had found myself as a I tell you my title, you know which company it was, but as a senior-most architect, I found myself developing a lot of the strategic work that went up to the C-level table, right? I developed the work, crafted, I conceived of the ideas, I crafted the PowerPoints, which were the weapon of choice at the time. I educated the people on what that would be, I connected the dots. Yet I was never invited to the presentation, to the senior-most levels. And I'm not an inarticulate person. I clean up okay. I'm not, in other words, why am I not invited? And this woman said to me, she finally, and I just became increasingly frustrated. And in fact, I brought that frustration into almost every prep meeting, right? I'd go to the prep meeting and say, well, if I was there, what I would say is blah, blah, blah. So you need to say that, and I became more difficult to work with as a result. I mean, I wasn't unpleasant, I didn't dislike anybody. It's just that I was injecting a bit of discomfort into those prep meetings. And what this woman said to me is, Angela, we would love to have you in those meetings. We'd love to have access to your knowledge. We'd love you to be able to answer the questions that are asked. We'd love to have you there. We just don't know what your face is going to look like when someone asks a question you think is stupid. I said, wow. I mean, I think I thought of myself as a nice person. Think. I mean, but apparently my face was betraying my inner thoughts. And she said, we can't take you in there. So my brain was working in my favor, but my face was working against me. I mean, in some ways, nothing you can do about it, but in the other way, I learned a little bit about body language, and I learned a little bit about facial expression. And I learned how the actions that I take are impacting the message. And that I was artificially constraining my own ability to be impactful for the company and my ability to advance in that company. So, we do a lot of that sort of self-inflicted constraining as architects when we bring frustration into meetings. The nature of what we do, the tasks that we're given are things that are very broad end-to-end sorts of things. We have deep technology understanding across the board, yet we're also the only ones in many cases that connect all the dots. And we work with teams of very, very smart, brilliant people who are purposefully myopic because their job is to deliver one thing and do it very well. The things that they do, optimizing for that delivery activity, may impact negatively other parts of the estate, other parts of the strategy, right? We know that, that's what we do on a daily basis. We figure all that out, and it frustrates us sometimes when other people don't get that. And so we have to explain it once again. So again, we don't do ourselves any favors when we don't engage in a highly professional, highly respectful manner with people from all types of organizations inside of our company. So that's something we can certainly do. The other thing is, of course, value add. That the value that we bring is often not well understood. My dad told me when I was young, and I was first starting just to have a job and have to present something to somebody at that job. And you've heard this 1,000 times, and my dad's like, okay, tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them what you told them, right? And so at the time I laughed, I thought it was funny, but we all know that to be a truth. And so I think that one of the things we don't often do, because we want to go in and we engage and we just want to get stuff done, is we forget to tell them what we're going to tell them. We do the telling, but then we forget to tell them what we just told them, and we forget to tell them what the impact of what we just told them is. So if we can say, what I just told you and all the stuff that we just discussed, let me show you how this is going to play out. Take this and go be successful with it. I think that just something as simple as that, easy for anyone in this room to do, would be significantly impactful. Anyway, so that's sort of the architecture applied on where we are. All right, so let's talk about what's happening today. Digital opportunity. Because we've been talking about this architecture plot for a while. But right now, I think this is the time. I think this is our time. So everyone here has heard about digital transformation, yada, yada, yada. And of course, it's not just digital transformation that's happening within traditional lines of business. It's a transformation of all lines of business. I'm not going to beat that dead horse because everyone here lives that, breathes that every single day. But when we think about digital, let's remember, is not just the intersection and the blending of business and technology. We've heard that 1,000 times, right? Technology advance enables business evolution in ways unprecedented. I mean, these are known and accepted truths. But digital, yes, business and technology, is also about data and design and ethics and society and economics, humanities. This is digital. It's this very, very broad spectrum of disparate yet highly integrated concepts. And what is the title that we have in corporate America today for someone who is nearly expert at all of that?
CEO.
That is a wonderfully generous answer. For those of you that didn't hear, I said CEO. Some CEOs do fit that bill. That is correct, but not all. Is it really reasonable to expect right now anyone in the business community as a whole, in which I include us, to have expertise across the board? For some geniuses, yes. For some extraordinarily brilliant people, yes. Many of whom may be sitting here in this room. However, it would be very rare, right? So then, when you think about the integrative nature of digital, of the new digital economy, the integrative nature of digital economy requires people who know how to integrate things that are maybe not obviously collectible. And who might that be? I don't know. The integrative nature of digital should drive how we define our business process. It should define how we change our businesses. Yeah, you've heard about the unbundling, right? You know, how you take your business, you turn it on its side, you strip out pieces, you do only what you're good at, you know, that sort of thing. It's how you prevent disruption, it's how you disrupt other businesses. But also, it should inform who does this work. Who is doing this work? Who's doing the work across the digital landscape? So think about ethics. I mentioned ethics as one of those things I rattled off, right? Self-driving cars. Self-driving car, imagine a scenario where a self-driving car is carrying passengers, senses an obstruction that will, if hit, almost certainly injure or perhaps kill the passenger. The self-driving car with sensors as sensitive as the ones in our phones, which can tell if your eyes are bloodshot from 20 feet away. A self-driving car's sensors recognizes that there are pedestrians in the area that you'd have to swerve into to save the passenger of the car. What decision is made automatically by that car? I don't know. Who created the logic? Who defined what the decision should be? Who created that logic that will then be executed in that scenario? Probably an architect. Who should have that opportunity? Who should be making that decision? You know, these are truly, I shouldn't say they're unprecedented because we've been making, as long as we've been automating process, as long as we've been flying people to outer space or around the countries or around the world, some of those sorts of decisions have been automated before. But never before has the responsibility of someone in the architecture role been so important and so impactful across the board. So when you think about digital economy, suddenly people are thinking about who really gets to make these big decisions that have societal impact, significant societal impact. Right now, you're in a position to raise your hand. And you could justify the raising of your hand by the deep contextual understanding that you have, bring to bear in all of your engagements in your current companies. So there's a tremendous opportunity there. Another issue that is being recognized by business leaders across multiple types of businesses is the missing acumen across various business divisions and functional areas. So, you can have the best analytics in the whole wide world, but if you don't have someone with data acumen reading those reports or crafting those reports with your analytics capability that you guys built as part of your technology estate, then it's of limited use to your company. Somehow, we have to start injecting acumen across that whole list of things I rattled off with digital into all aspects of the business. And so, how do we do that? We need to educate. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, and how to do that a little bit later. But in some cases, businesses are deciding just to acquire the acumen. Look at Walmart recently acquired Jet.com. They just bought the talent. Did Walmart need that business? No. They bought the talent. I'm interested in buying talent and technology. Do I care about buying companies with a large market share of something and I'm going to buy the market that they have? Maybe. That would be gravy. It's interesting to think about injecting talent in a non-traditional way into your company. And it's interesting to think about building that talent from within the company. You this is on the minds of most business leaders today. Think about, and I'm jumping a little bit ahead on your next steps, but think about how resonant an argument that you could help with that would be to one of these executives who I mentioned is quite concerned with how the business runs and how well the business is going to evolve and be competitive. The other thing I wanted to mention is that in this new digital world, I mentioned the integrative nature of it. Two things are happening. First, it's becoming extremely easy to build and deploy capability that is technology enabled. It's extraordinarily easy. And so it's relatively cheap, right? You just sort of link it all together as best you can and you deploy it. It's easy. It's being done outside of the IT division in many cases. Super easy to do, super cheap. The mistakes made, the mistakes and the cost of those mistakes, unprecedentedly large. Huge cost. You do that wrong, the cost is enormous. I mean, it's just excruciating. And so I think we're about to the point where we're going to start seeing some of those costs. Pay attention to that. So when you think about what's happening in your estate that's outside of your control, outside of your domain, perhaps is being allowed to happen, these are the sorts of things you should track and you should bring up and you should use as a platform on which you build a process that allows for quick, easy adoption of technology and quick business evolution, but does not cost the company money and incur unnecessary risk. I had another thought on that, but I can't. I'll come back to it. I'm sure it will come back to me. So that's certainly something that I think is probably worth going off and exploring. Something that I found interesting. Have you guys read the Kevin Kelly book called The Inevitable? The Inevitable, and then there's a subtitle that I can never get right without reading it. It's something like the 12, and I can't even read my own writing here. It's something like the 12 technologies that are going to change everything. I don't know. No, look it up. Kevin Kelly, The Inevitable, whatever. Anyway, in it, he says some really interesting things, and one of them is change. Everything is changing, yeah, right? Everything is changing, but everything will always continue to change. Everything from this point forward, business models, everything will continue to evolve and will always be in flux, always, always, always. Everyone disagree with that? It's not new news, it's not breaking news. He says it in a very wonderfully resonant way, so I would encourage you to read it. But if you buy that, as I think most of us do, then another statement he makes is really interesting. He says the most impactful innovation in the last few hundred years to society is pausing so you can, in your own mind, think about what you think it might be, is the scientific process. Because scientific process has allowed for the delivery of some of the greatest innovations and differentiators to our society ever made. And so he has this whole notion of process before progress. And so if you buy that we are now in a situation where change is constant, business change, not just technology change. We live in a world where change is always constant. But business, now all of our business partners, or other members of the business community, are seeing it happen to them for the first time, right? And we have been living in it for so long. We have an opportunity to work with those business leaders and identify a model that allows for the early sensing, the easy reaction to, and the ability to drive change on a business level. Who else in your business community has done this for as long as those of us in IT have done it? Nobody. Are the business leaders going to think about us, top of mind, as their go-to folks to help them with this? I will reference Dr. Goodnight's speech earlier today. Second time in my life I've followed Dr. Goodnight on a main stage. The first time was at a Forbes event for very senior executives. Dr. Goodnight's speech was extraordinarily different at that event. In that event, he described leadership considerations. He talked about building his company from the ground up as a private company. He talked about things he was able to do as a private owner of a company that maybe you couldn't do, at least traditionally, in a publicly traded company. He gave the audience tips for incorporating some of the great lessons learned into public company management. It was a brilliant speech. It was very interesting, focused on leadership, focused on change, focused on managing very complex challenge. Dr. Goodnight, who I really respect and admire, came to speak to a bunch of architects and talked about process architecture. This is a problem. If people in technology companies, and I'm making a gross generalization based on what speech we just heard, but if someone like Dr. Goodnight, who's a very open-minded, very smart, very engaged, very respectful of technologists, built his company on technology, loves technology himself, if he thought that the most important thing for us to hear, you to hear, is processor architecture work, which was interesting. I'm sure we all enjoyed it. I did. I enjoyed it. But it's indicative, I think, of a problem that we have. We have the IT box problem. Go sit in the IT box. No one is going to break IT out of the IT box faster than a strong group of architects. This is the challenge that we have. And now is the time, because suddenly the business community is faced with things that we are uniquely positioned to help them address. So let's talk about why we're uniquely positioned. I have a couple of notes here that I made, actually, while Paul was talking. When he was telling me what I'd be talking about, maybe I should write something down. So there's this notion of ambidextrous business models. Everyone here has heard about bimodal IT. I'm just curious, as sort of a non sequitur, but how many people believe in bimodal IT? Okay, about half and half. So BCS just came out with a wonderful paper, essentially shooting it down. It's funny. I've always believed in sort of multimodal IT. The notion of bimodal IT, I'm sure everyone knows, but just in case there are one or two of you that don't, it's the idea, and Gartner's a big proponent of this, that you have a segment of your organization that focuses on sort of keeping the lights on. They optimize for just keeping the lights on, keep things running, and then you have a second segment that's optimized for really fast, speedy delivery, right? Essentially, it's the notion of segmentation and high specialization. I believe that things are not binary; they're not fast and slow. They're quite broad. It's a multimodal sort of IT environment. That's the end of my non sequitur, but I just thought I'd get that out there because businesses are experiencing the same thing. Right now, we have businesses, some of them are traditional businesses, they're ways in which our company has been making money historically. Some of them are like maybe some adjacencies into which we've ventured, and we're trying to figure out how can we maximize the value we get out of those types of businesses. But also, we're starting to see, and I'm speaking for us as a business community as a whole, we're starting to see completely new ways of making money and bringing value to the shareholders and serving our customers in ways that are hadn't even thought about before. And the business community as a whole is trying to figure out how are we going to do all this. It's running in a multimodal way, which is, by the way in which a lot of IT shops have run for a long time at the direction of many good architects. So again, one of these things that's a direct learning. So then how would you take this into a conversation with a senior executive? You might say, I wanted to share with you some things that I've learned that may be of use to you, because I've noticed how your business is evolving. Let's talk a little bit more about methods later, but that's, I think, another piece where your leadership is going to become invaluable to your company. Another thing that's happening with this digital evolution is this idea of network centricity. So we talked about the interconnected nature of a digital business and society evolving associatedly. again, I'm not going to draw too fine a point on this because it's sort of obvious, it sort of states itself, but this is where we come in, right? So many architects, so much of what you do is all about the integration piece. So you can take that and take that value into your business communications. And then last, there was an interesting piece in the Atlantic on called Overcomplicated. Did anyone here read that? It was very interesting. Basically, it said, and there have been a number of other pieces I've read recently, that's the one that sticks out of my mind, but it's this notion that, and this will sound very familiar to you, it's this notion that business is becoming so complicated and so it's moving so very quickly that we can't, it's not reasonable to expect a single executive to be able to manage all of that, right? And so it's like, oh, how are we going to do this? It's sort of as a broad business community. Again, who's going to help out with that? Someone with your capabilities, someone with the architecture capabilities. So let's jump straight into the last part, which is, okay, what do you do with all this, right? So we've talked about what drives people, what drives the people who are making decisions about how much money you get, about what you're going to be doing on a week-to-week basis, about whether or not you're going to rise in your career and how influential you're going to be, and so on. How are they incented? We talked about that. We talked about perhaps different ways that can impact your. See, this is me telling you what I've told you. It's how that's going to impact your decisions and prioritizations, right? So that's that. Then we talked about sort of the rut architects are sort of in, and then we talked about and why they're in that rut. And then we talked about the opportunity, things that are happening that so closely mirror the challenges we've been faced with within the technology world for so many years, and why architects and the skills that we've honed over those years are perfectly positioned to be game changers for our business. So then how do you get there? Okay, that's my blank side. The first thing is, you have to educate your company. You have an obligation. If you're taking a paycheck from your company, you have an obligation to educate them. Remember we talked about the absence of acumen across multiple business divisions related to data, related to technology. We need to make sure that we, the architecture community, become the advocates and the builders of that acumen. Paul, I think, likened technologists to the finance folks. It's funny. We've talked many times about the evolution of finance as being a strong business leader. And if you're going to put on a piece of paper how a company makes money, and you're going to kind of map it out, like all the different ways a company can make money, a small upper left-hand corner would be probably the way you make money traditionally, like you sell stuff, you make widgets, whatever. And then everything else in the paper would be a financial lever. You make money with the company's money. It's a financial lever. So that's why the CFO is so powerful, and should be. Similarly, I think, and by the way, does all financial acumen live only in the CFO's organization? Can you imagine a case in which a business leader of, say, a business line that you have would say, I really don't understand that much about finance? Can you imagine this sort of circumstance in which that would happen? Or maybe doesn't have anyone with any sort of financial expertise in his or her organization. No. Similarly, you won't see in 5 years, maybe even sooner, you won't see a senior executive of any sort saying, I don't understand anything about technology. I mean, people have been wearing that like a badge of honor for I don't know how long, don't know why, but it has been the case. So you're going to stop seeing that, right? Everyone's going to have to understand that they have to know a little bit about technology, or at least fake their way through, and they're going to surround themselves with people that know a lot about technology and data. Until that full realization happens, you can help them build those organizations. You can join their organizations, you can bring them your colleagues to help join their organizations, you can train their existing organizations, you can become the connector for other organizations who have done it well. Things that we're really good at doing, connecting with multiple third parties types. You connect not only with vendors who are trying to sell you something, you connect with the startup communities, right? You know what investments have been made by the various VCs into the various startups. You know where the money's going. You know who's making money at that and who's not making money. You can make all sorts of connections. You could allow a business line to be customer zero for a startup that gives the business line a capability almost for free so that they have a reference account. You can make that happen, like that. You can make it happen. You can identify what it should be and you can make it happen. That's just a simple example. You can work with universities. You can work with universities to use research that is being developed as part of those universities, and you can incorporate that into work happening now in many of your business lines. Maybe historically it would have been within IT, but now it's within your business lines. All of a sudden you're this massive, important connector for your business community. You do that so well. That's so right in your wheelhouse. Offer it up. Allow your business community to understand the value that you can bring outside of solving tough little technical problems. You're a connector. All of a sudden, they understand that. Also be overt about it. Don't forget to tell them what you just did. Be very overt about it. The other thing I think that we all need to do is go back and build the infrastructure for change. Remember we talked about we have to be able to build the capability that allows us to, sense change when it's coming, react to change when it happens to us, and then, maybe force change when it needs to happen. That's a huge infrastructure. That's a huge capability. Your CIO should be doing exactly that. Your CIO should be doing that for the company. But it's possible your CIO doesn't know how to do that. And so you need to help your CIO understand how to do that. Because if the CIO doesn't do it, someone else is going to do it as best they can, probably an external consultant, and it's going to happen to you, and you're not going to be in a position you want to be in, and you won't have added the value that you could have added to the company. So when you think about creating that, that would be a sit down with your CIO, talking about organizational structure, talking about technology capabilities that are required to deliver the business outcomes that the business wants to achieve in existing lines of business and where new lines of business could be created. So it's that sort of mapping activity. You do it very well, and that needs to start happening explicitly. Set up formal meetings for that to happen. Own that piece. If you're not owning that piece, if you're having a chief architect title and you're sitting in this room and you're not doing that with members of your business community, other members of your business community, just as you are a member, then you're not doing your job. So that is in a nutshell the sorts of things that I think you should be doing. I want to encourage you to use the skills that you have, that you've honed over the years, to be a significant agent of change and an overt agent of change. The appetite's there. Every executive's worried about being successful. And many executives are wondering if they have the capabilities they need to be successful. You can help them think through that. The perspective is valuable. I can't wait to see what's going to happen in the next year or 2 years. So thanks for giving me a chance to chat. Before I go, does anyone here have any questions? Fabulous. All right. Sorry.
I think it's if you're stuck under IT, and you're stuck back down in IT, you tend to, there's a lot of people off when you start setting up. How do you go about getting started, or how do you tell people?
Paul's question is, how do you get started? If you're in IT and you've been put in that IT box, and you've been told to go sit in that box until we need you, we'll let you know when we need you. How do you break out without having people say, who does he think he is? You're stepping on people's toes, especially when you start going to the bosses of some of your peers, where the boss owns a business line and your peers are the people who are typically giving you the orders. How do you manage that? I will refer back to my comment about arrogance. It's very important. Number one, I would call your peers and tell them what you're going to do and invite them to the meeting. You don't have to be, when I said be overt about what you're doing, I didn't mean grab all the credit. You're not going to be successful on your own. Reach out to the peers, say, first set up the meeting, make it a done deal, set the meeting up. Then reach out to your peers and say, look, this is what I've done. Made a meeting with your boss. This is what I want to talk to him or her about. And, let's sit down and have a pre-meeting, or have a chat on the phone, or have a chat or Skype, or whatever. And then let's, together, go in pre-wired and just have a chat. This is part of what architects do, and it's part of my job. I don't want to step on your toes, but it's sort of what I'm expected to do. So let's have a conversation, and maybe I'll be able to help you make connections and do other things that I think are important to your business evolution. It's just a simple conversation. And one thing you definitely don't want to do is say, try to get a meeting with someone like me and say that what you want to do is sit down with me for an hour and better understand what I need from you and how you can help me. Because there is zero chance I will take that meeting. Because if you haven't read all the internal documentation about what my division is doing and what's top of mind for me, you haven't done any, then you don't need to take, if you haven't read it, that's the only circumstance in which you would ask me to sit down and explain it to you. Or if you have read it, you don't understand it, God help you, I'm certainly not gonna give you an hour of my time. So these are the things where, do your internal homework, try to get your hands on the last all hands deck from a given business leader, read it. Read what's been said externally. Most business line leaders have said some things externally, read all of that. You have the context, and then take that into, here's how I'm gonna help you. And, don't make a presentation, for goodness sakes. Don't take a bunch of slides in. Have a conversation. When I go speak to the CFO, or when I go speak to the head of our rent-to-own business, or the head of our Acceptance Now business, do you think I walk in with a deck? I might as well walk in with a big sign that's hung around my neck saying, I am very junior and can't have an adult conversation without slides. All right? Just don't, no. Just sit down, one human being to another, one smart person to another, and have a conversation about things you think are happening, things you've observed happening in the broader market, things that you've seen that he or she wants to do, and where you think you can plug in and help. And say, hey, I don't need money for this. I'm happy to help out. Think of me as like an advisor. It's sort of my job, I'm an architect. That's what I do. It's going to take more time than you currently have, probably, but it will pay off for your company, for your shareholders, for your customers, and certainly for you and your career in ways, that continue to keep your head down and your nose clean is just not going to do it for you. It's a good question. Any other questions? Yes, Rob.
So I resonated with what you said about the architecture group themselves being very, very broad in their viewpoints, having actual veterans, like business jobs and such as well. The way that I look at architects is sort of a T, where you have a very deep understanding of the domain, sort of a 100-foot understanding of your particular domain, and then a very inch-deep understanding of other domains. This might be a very heretical question to ask in a room full of technologists, but could that domain that you're very, very good at, that you understand very well, be non-technology, like project management, like business analysis?
So what Rob is asking, he refers to what he calls the T of technology, of architecture expertise, where you have broad understanding across multiple domains, those presumably including deep technology as well as business-related items or process management-related items. And then you typically have a very deep area. That's sort of what you do. It's like your data architect, everything about data, or everything about infrastructure, or everything about integration, or whatever, right? Software, etc. And so his question is, could one of those T legs be a non-technical thing? I have met very, very good business architects. I have met brilliant people who are absolutely just very, scary smart, that don't know a lot about technology as far as how it works. But they know a lot about problem solving. They know a lot about complexity. They're able to do that sort of deep critical thinking that we described, and are very good, and they're called business architects. And so I believe that yes, it is possible to have that team. I will also add, surprisingly without the benefit of a drink in my hand, that I am also a bit of a snob about technology depth. So personally, I prefer to see people with deep technology chops in at least one area be architects. Whether or not they're or had at one time had deep technical chops, also okay. And the reason I think that's important is because when you go very deep into how technology works, you understand every little impact of every little change and every little aspect of technology, you're pretty good at solving those larger problems as well that are more abstract in nature. So that's a bit of a personal bias, but I think generally the community understands that no, you don't need to be technical to be a very good, impactful architect.
Is that it?
Thanks for your time. I enjoyed seeing you.